The sound wasn't a crack. It was a thunderclap. In the middle of the crowded county courthouse in Shelby County, a corrupt detective, a man who thought he owned the law, made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't just strike a woman. He struck a decorated military police officer. Detective Derek Hanson thought his badge gave him the right to slap Nicole Patterson across the face for disrespecting him. He expected fear. He expected tears. What he got was a lesson in physics. 1 second later, Hanson was staring at the ceiling lights, knocked out cold before his body even hit the floor. But the knockout was just the beginning. What they found in his pockets while he was unconscious would tear the entire city apart. This is the story of the slap heard around the world, and the karma that followed. The air conditioning in the courtroom had been broken, and the atmosphere was less like a hall of justice and more like a pressure cooker. The humidity of the southern summer clung to the walls, making the wood paneling look darker, slicker, and more oppressive. Judge William Baxter sat on the bench, fanning himself with a manila folder. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. He was a man who preferred quick pleas and early lunches, not the drawn-out torture of a police misconduct hearing. But today the gallery was packed. Every seat was taken, and the overflow spilled into the hallway. Sitting in the witness box was Detective Derek Hanson. If you looked up arrogance in the dictionary, you'd find Hanson's mugshot. He was a large man, built like a linebacker, who had let himself go just enough to look imposing rather than athletic. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than a rookie cop's annual salary, and he chewed a piece of gum with a slow, rhythmic insolence that set everyone's teeth on edge. Hanson wasn't just a cop in this town. He was an institution. He ran the narcotics division like his own private kingdom, and for a long time nobody had dared to cross the moat. Until today, sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the defense table, sat a woman who didn't fit the usual demographic of Hanson's victims. She was tall, with posture so rigid, she looked like she was carved from obsidian. She wore a simple navy blue blazer and slacks, but the way she held herself screamed uniform. This was Nicole Patterson. To the casual observer, she was just another concerned family member. But those who knew, really knew, saw the telltale signs. The calluses on her knuckles, the way her eyes constantly scanned the exits and the bailiff's holsters. Nicole wasn't just a spectator. She was a sergeant major in the military police corps, a combat veteran with multiple tours overseas, and a specialist in internal investigations. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching the back of Derek Hanson's head with the intensity of a sniper, waiting for the wind to die down. Detective Hanson, the defense attorney, a weary but sharp public defender named Ryan Mitchell, said. He adjusted his glasses, sweat beading on his forehead. Let's go back to the night of the arrest. You stated in your report that you found the illicit substance in the glove box of the defendant's vehicle before you requested backup. Is that correct? Hanson smirked. He didn't even lean toward the microphone. That's what the report says, counselor. Can't you read? A few snickers rippled through the back of the room. Hanson's cronies, other officers who had come to show support or perhaps intimidation. I can read just fine, Detective, Mitchell said, his voice tightening. But we have a dispatch log that suggests you called for a tow truck before you claim to have found the drugs. Why call for a tow if you hadn't found a reason to arrest the driver yet? Hanson's chewing slowed. He shifted in the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Intuition. I've been on the job for a long time. I know a perp when I see one. I knew I was going to find something. So you decided the guilt before the evidence, Mitchell pressed. I decided I wasn't going to let a punk walk away with product in his car, Hanson snapped, his voice rising. I keep these streets clean. Maybe you should try saying thank you instead of nitpicking. Judge Baxter cleared his throat. "Detective, watch your tone. Answer the questions." Hanson shot a glance at the judge, a look that bordered on insubordination. He knew where the judge's skeletons were buried. He knew who paid for the judge's lake house. The reprimand was just for show. Nicole Patterson didn't blink. She watched Hanson's hands. They were clenching and unclenching on the railing of the witness box. He was losing control. That was good. An angry man makes mistakes, and Nicole was counting on him making a big one. She wasn't here for herself. She was here for Private First Class Tyler Morgan, a young soldier under her command who was currently sitting at the defense table, head bowed, terrified. Tyler had been driving home to visit his sick mother when Hanson pulled him over. Tyler had no record, no drugs, and a spotless service history, but he had a nice car, and Hanson didn't like punks in nice cars. Now Tyler was facing serious time for possession of heroin that Nicole knew with absolute certainty Hanson had planted, but proving it, that was the war, and the courtroom was the battlefield. The cross-examination dragged on. The heat in the room became suffocating. The air smelled of stale sweat and floor wax. Ryan Mitchell, the public defender, was doing a better job than anyone expected. He was chipping away at Hanson's armor, exposing the inconsistencies, the missing body cam footage, the magical appearance of evidence. "Detective," Mitchell said, pulling a piece of paper from his stack, "are you familiar with the term ghost dope?" Hanson's eyes narrowed. The gum stopped moving entirely. "I don't know street slang, counselor." "It's not street slang, detective. It's a term used in internal affairs," Mitchell said, his voice gaining strength. "It refers to drugs confiscated from one crime scene that are never logged into evidence, but instead kept by the officer to plant on future suspects to justify an arrest." "Objection!" the prosecutor shouted, jumping up. "Speculation, badgering the witness." "I'm going to allow it," Judge Baxter said, surprisingly. Even he could feel the mood in the room shifting. The audience was silent now. The tension was a physical weight. "I have never planted evidence in my life," Hanson growled, leaning forward, his jaw tight. "And I resent the accusation from a cheap lawyer defending a drug-dealing soldier." At the mention of drug-dealing soldier, Nicole Patterson stood up. It wasn't a violent motion. It was smooth, controlled and commanding. The sound of her chair legs scraping against the floor cut through the silence like a knife. Hanson's eyes snapped to her. He had noticed her earlier. It was hard not to, but he had dismissed her. Now, standing at her full height with shoulders squared, she looked dangerous. "Is there a problem in the gallery?" Judge Baxter asked, peering over his glasses. Nicole spoke, her voice calm, but projecting to every corner of the room without shouting. "The defendant is a United States soldier with a spotless record, Your Honor. The only criminal in this room is the man in the witness box." The courtroom gasped. "Order!" Baxter banged his gavel. "Ma'am, sit down or I will have you removed." Hanson laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Let her talk, Judge. It's probably the girlfriend or maybe the sister. They all stick together, don't they?" The racial undertone was unmistakable. The air in the room seemed to drop. Nicole didn't flinch. She stepped out of the row and moved into the aisle. The bailiff, a young deputy named Owens, looked at her uncertainly. He sensed authority radiating off her and hesitated to grab her. "I am Sergeant Major Nicole Patterson, military police," she said, locking eyes with Hanson. "And I am here to formally testify that on the night of the arrest, Detective Hanson's personal vehicle was tracked via GPS to a known narcotics distribution hub before he pulled over Private Morgan." Hanson's face went from red to purple. This was information nobody was supposed to have. The GPS data on his private car. That was impossible, unless the feds were already watching him. "You're lying," Hanson shouted, standing up in the witness box. He pointed a thick finger at her. "Get this bitch out of my courtroom." "It's not your courtroom, Detective," Nicole said, taking a step closer to the bar that separated the gallery from the court floor. "And those GPS logs are already in the hands of the FBI." That was the trigger. Hanson, fueled by adrenaline, fear, and a lifetime of unchecked power, lost his mind. He didn't think, he reacted. He vaulted over the low, swinging gate of the witness box, storming onto the floor of the courtroom. "I'm sick of you people coming into my town and telling me how to do my job," Hanson roared. The bailiff moved too late. The judge was hammering the gavel, shouting for order. But it was just noise. Hanson charged toward the aisle where Nicole stood. She didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. She simply widened her stance, her hands coming up to a defensive position, open palms close to her face. Deceptive. Hanson reached the wooden railing, separating them. He was a big man, heavy and full of momentum. He reached over the rail, grabbing Nicole by the lapel of her blazer with his left hand, yanking her forward. "You shut your mouth when you speak to the law," he screamed, spraying spit. And then he did it. With his right hand, he wound back and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap across Nicole's face. The sound was sickening. It echoed off the high ceilings. The entire courtroom froze in horror. A police officer had just physically assaulted a woman, a military official in open court. Nicole's head snapped to the side. The force of the blow cut her lip. A trickle of blood appeared. Hanson smirked, breathing heavily, thinking he had won, thinking he had asserted dominance. That's right. Know your place. Slowly, Nicole turned her head back to face him. Her expression hadn't changed. But her eyes were no longer human. They were cold, calculating. She wiped the blood from her lip with her thumb, looked at it, and then looked at Hanson. "My turn," she whispered. Hanson blinked. "What?" He never finished the word. Time became elastic, stretching out the moment after Hanson's hand left Nicole's face. Hanson was still grinning, a feral, satisfied look of a bully who had just established dominance. He was close to her, his left hand still gripping her blazer, his body weight leaning over the railing. He was totally exposed. He was used to people shrinking away. He had zero defense for someone moving forward. "Miss A." Nicole didn't step back. She stepped in. It wasn't a barroom brawl punch. It wasn't a wild swing born of anger. It was pure distilled military combatives, muscle memory honed by years of repetitive drilling. In a motion almost too fast for the human eye to track, Nicole's left hand came up, trapping Hanson's wrist that was holding her jacket, locking his arm in place so he couldn't retreat. Simultaneously, her right hand opened. She didn't make a fist. A fist could break against a skull like Hanson's. She used the heel of her palm, a weapon harder than bone. She drove upward. The strike was compact, but it had the entire rotation of her hips and the driving force of her legs behind it. The sound was a dense, wet thud of impact. Nicole's palm heel strike connected squarely with the underside of Detective Derek Hanson's jaw, right on the button. The force was catastrophic. It forced his head sharply upward and backward, jarring his spine and causing his brain to rattle violently inside his skull. Hanson's eyes didn't just roll back. They seemed to vanish entirely into his head. His grip on her jacket instantly went slack. The grin dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of oblivion. Nicole stepped back smoothly, releasing his wrist. For one surreal second, Detective Derek Hanson, the terror of the Shelby County streets, stood perfectly upright, unconscious on his feet. Then gravity claimed him. He fell like a condemned building. He didn't crumple. He tipped over, rigid as a board. He hit the linoleum floor of the courtroom aisle face first with a sickening crash that shook the defense table. He didn't move. He didn't twitch. He just lay there, a mountain of expensive suit and corrupt flesh face down between the pews. The silence that fell over the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of everyone's lungs. Judge Baxter stood frozen, his gavel hovering in midair. The prosecutor's jaw was literally hanging open. Ryan Mitchell, the public defender, looked like he'd just seen a magic trick. Nicole Patterson stood over the fallen detective. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a tissue, and dabbed the cut on her lip again. She looked up at the stunned judge, her voice calm, level, and utterly unmoved. Your Honor, the witness assaulted a senior non-commissioned officer of the United States Army. I neutralized the threat. I request military police backup be called immediately to take this man into custody. Chaos erupted a split second later. It was pandemonium. Bailiff, secure the room. Get medical. Judge Baxter was screaming, banging his gavel furiously, though nobody was listening to it anymore. Deputy Owens, the young bailiff who had hesitated earlier, now scrambled over the railing. He knelt beside the motionless form of Detective Hanson, his face pale. He's out cold, Judge. Really cold, Owens shouted over the din of the gallery where people were standing on benches to get a better look. Phones out, recording everything. Check his airway, turn him over, Baxter commanded, panic creeping into his voice. The last thing he needed was the city's top narc dying in his courtroom after getting dropped by a woman. Owens grabbed Hanson's massive shoulder and hefted the dead weight onto his back. Hanson's nose was bleeding heavily where it had smashed against the floor, and his breathing was a shallow, rattling snore. Loosen his tie, someone shouted. Deputy Owens, fumbling with adrenaline, reached for Hanson's neck to loosen the silk tie. In his haste, he snagged the lapel of Hanson's suit jacket, jerking it open wildly. Hanson had been carrying a lot of things in that jacket. His spare magazine for his Glock, a pack of gum, and something else. As the jacket flapped open, an object dislodged from an interior pocket. It slid out across the slick silk lining and tumbled onto the courtroom floor, spinning before coming to rest right at the feet of Ryan Mitchell, the defense attorney. It was a clear plastic sandwich bag. Inside were small, tightly wrapped aluminum foil bindles. The room went silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This wasn't shock at violence. This was the sickening realization of truth. Ryan Mitchell stared at the bag. He didn't touch it. He slowly looked up at the judge, then at the prosecutor. Your Honor, Mitchell said, his voice shaking with fury, pointing a trembling finger at the bag on the floor. That looks exactly like the packaging of the heroin allegedly found in my client's car. The prosecutor, a woman who had worked with Hanson for years, looked like she was going to be sick. She took a step forward, stared at the bag, and retreated as if it were radioactive. Nicole Patterson walked over. She stood over the bag, looking down. Ghost dope, Nicole said, her voice cutting through the room. He was carrying his supply. He probably planned to plant some more on me if I didn't back down. Suddenly, the back doors of the courtroom burst open. 4 uniformed military police officers wearing armbands and carrying sidearms marched in with precision. They had been waiting in the hall on standby per Nicole's orders before she even entered the courtroom. They moved directly to Nicole, saluting crisply. Sergeant Major, are you secure? The lead MP barked. I am, Nicole said, returning the salute, blood still staining her lip. She pointed to the unconscious heap on the floor, and then to the bag of drugs next to him. That man assaulted me, and it appears he just dropped his personal stash of evidence on the floor of a court of law. Secure the scene. Nobody touches that bag until the FBI arrives. I already called them." Judge Baxter looked at the MPs taking over his courtroom, looked at the unconscious detective, looked at the drugs, and realized his career was likely over. The karma hadn't just hit Detective Hanson. It had just leveled the entire building. But as Hanson began to groan, groggy and trying to figure out why the ceiling lights were spinning, he had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Consciousness returned to Detective Derek Hanson, not as a light, but as a throbbing red-hot spike driven through the center of his skull. His first sensation was the smell of floor wax and dust pressing against his cheek. His second sensation was the cold realization that he was on the ground and people were looking down at him. He groaned, pushing himself up on shaking arms. The room spun violently. His jaw felt unhinged. He tried to speak, to bark an order, but all that came out was a garbled slur. "What? Who hit?" "Stay down, detective," a deep voice commanded. It wasn't the judge. It wasn't his partner. Hanson blinked the blurriness from his eyes and looked up. He wasn't looking at friendly faces. He was looking at the polished black boots of 4 military police officers forming a perimeter around him. Beyond them, the courtroom gallery was a sea of raised smartphones recording his humiliation in high definition. "Get off me!" Hanson spat, trying to scramble to his knees. "I'm a police officer. Who struck me? I want her arrested for assault on a—" "You are not the victim here, Mr. Hanson." The voice of Nicole Patterson cut through the fog in his brain. She was standing outside the circle of MPs, looking down at him with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. Hanson followed her gaze. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the floor just inches from his left hand. Hanson looked down. There, glistening under the fluorescent lights, was the sandwich bag. Foil bindles, heroin. The ghost dope he had carried in his breast pocket for years. His insurance policy. His tool for framing anyone who dared to drive a nice car in the wrong neighborhood. The color drained from Hanson's face so fast it looked like he had died again. He instinctively reached for it. A desperate lizard brain reaction to hide the evidence. A heavy boot stomped down on his hand, pinning it to the floor. It wasn't Nicole. It was a man in a dark gray suit who had just entered the room, flanked by 3 tactical agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters. FBI. "Don't touch the evidence, Hanson," the man in the suit said smoothly. Hanson looked up, squinting through the pane. He recognized the man. Special Agent Nathan Reed, Internal Corruption Task Force. Hanson had spent years avoiding Reed, mocking him at police bars, calling him a Fed suit. Now Reed was standing over him like the Grim Reaper. "Reed," Hanson wheezed, "this is a setup. That woman, she planted it on me when she hit me. We have multiple angles of video from the gallery that show it falling out of your pocket, Derek," Reed said, crouching down so their faces were level. "And we have the GPS data Sergeant Major Patterson provided. And we have the fact that you just assaulted a decorated federal officer in open court." Reed stood up and nodded to the MPs. "Get him up." The MPs hoisted Hanson to his feet. He swayed, his legs like jelly. He looked toward the bench, seeking salvation. "Judge William," Hanson pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them this is your courtroom. You can't let them do this." Judge William Baxter was pale, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. He looked at Agent Reed, then at the cameras, then at Hanson. He saw the sinking ship, and he made the only choice a rat makes. "The court has no jurisdiction over federal obstruction and assault charges," Baxter stammered, avoiding Hanson's eyes. "The defendant, Mr. Hanson, is remanded to federal custody." "You traitorous coward!" Hanson roared, lunging toward the bench, but the MPs wrenched his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight was louder than the gavel had ever been. Derek Hanson, Agent Reed announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You are under arrest for possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, assault on a federal officer, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As they marched Hanson out of the courtroom, dragging him past the defense table, he locked eyes with PFC Tyler Morgan, the young soldier he had tried to frame. Tyler didn't look scared anymore. He looked at Hanson with pity. "Court is adjourned." Judge Baxter banged the gavel, desperate to escape. "Not quite, Your Honor." Ryan Mitchell, the public defender, shouted over the noise. "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Tyler Morgan, with prejudice." The prosecutor, seeing the radioactive fallout descending on her office, didn't even stand up. "The state withdraws the charges. Case dismissed," Baxter mumbled, practically running for his chambers. Tyler Morgan stood up, tears streaming down his face. He turned to Nicole Patterson. He didn't know what to say. He just saluted. Nicole softened just for a moment. She reached out and squeezed the young soldier's shoulder. "Go home to your mother, Private. Your war is over. Mine is just starting." The knockout in the courtroom was the splash. The arrest was the wave. But what happened next was a tsunami that drowned the corruption of the county. Detective Hanson, sitting in a federal holding cell with a broken jaw wired shut and an ice pack on his head, thought he could ride it out. He thought he knew where the bodies were buried. He thought he had leverage. He was wrong. He had forgotten the first rule of karma. It always comes for your secrets. While Hanson was being processed, Agent Reed and his team were executing a warrant on Hanson's residence. It was a sprawling house in a gated community, a house that a detective's salary couldn't possibly afford. Nicole Patterson was there acting as a liaison for the military interests in the case. She stood on the front lawn watching the FBI team carry out boxes. "Sergeant Major," Agent Reed called out from the front door. "You need to see this." Nicole walked inside. The house was gaudy, filled with expensive leather furniture and massive TVs. But Reed led her to the basement. Behind a false wall in the wine cellar, they found it. Hanson's trophy room. It wasn't heads on the wall. It was paper. It was evidence. Hanson was a hoarder of leverage. In a fireproof safe drilled open by the FBI techs, they found stacks of ledgers. They weren't just about drug money. They were detailed logs of every favor he had done and every favor he was owed. "Look at this," Reed said, handing Nicole a leather-bound notebook. She opened it. The handwriting was jagged and aggressive. "Judge Baxter, DUI cover-up, cost money and dismissal of a case. Chief of Police, domestic dispute call at his mistress's apartment, buried the report. Owed promotion for Owens. Planted cocaine on Emily Warren, a teacher. She refused the date. Ruined her." Nicole's hands tightened on the book until the leather creaked. Emily Warren. She remembered that story on the news. A beloved kindergarten teacher arrested for trafficking. She had lost her job, her license, her home. Everyone thought she had a secret life, Nicole whispered, disgusted. It turned out she just said no to Derek Hanson at a bar. He kept receipts, Nicole whispered, disgusted. He was blackmailing the whole system. He was the spider in the center of the web, Reed said grimly. But this book burns the web down. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within hours of the notebook's discovery, the FBI raided the chambers of Judge William Baxter. They found him packing a suitcase, cash stuffed into a gym bag. He was arrested in his driveway, weeping as the neighbors watched. The chief of police resigned, effective immediately due to health reasons, but was picked up by federal agents a short distance from the airport an hour later. But the hardest hit came from the digital forensics. Hanson's phone seized at the courthouse contained a group chat. A chat named the Cleaning Crew. It included 6 other narcotics officers. They shared photos of their victims, jokes about planting evidence, and bets on how much jail time they could get for innocent people. They mocked their victims. They called them trash, thugs, and ATMs. By the next morning, the Shelby 7 were all in custody. The entire narcotics division was disbanded. Every case Derek Hanson had touched in recent years, hundreds of convictions, was immediately suspended for review. The local news was running non-stop coverage. The video of Nicole slapping Hanson had gone viral globally. It had millions of views in a day. The hashtag #The Slap became a symbol of resistance against corruption. But for Hanson, sitting in his silent cell, the reality hadn't fully set in until his lawyer arrived. It wasn't a high-priced shark. It was a court-appointed defender, a young woman who looked at him with undisguised contempt. "Where's my lawyer?" Hanson mumbled through his wired jaw. "Mr. Gold dropped you as a client this morning, Mr. Hanson," the young lawyer said, not sitting down. "All your assets have been frozen. Your house, your cars, your pension, it's all gone. You can't afford a private attorney." Hanson stared at the gray wall. "I have friends." "You have co-defendants," she corrected him. "And they are all cutting deals. Judge Baxter just signed a proffer. He's giving up everything on you to save his own skin. He says you masterminded the ring." Hanson closed his eyes. The pain in his jaw was nothing compared to the sensation of the floor dropping out from under him. "You are facing decades to life, Mr. Hanson," she said. "And since you are a former cop, you will be serving that time in administrative segregation, solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a box for the rest of your life." Nicole Patterson, meanwhile, was back at the base. She was sitting in her office looking at a photo of Emily Warren, the teacher Hanson had ruined. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had found in the file. "Hello," a timid voice answered. "Miss Warren, my name is Nicole Patterson. I have some news for you, and I think you're going to want to sit down for this. You're going to get your life back." The karma had circled back. The man who lived by destroying lives was about to watch his own life get dismantled brick by brick from inside a concrete box. But even Nicole didn't know that the final twist was waiting for Hanson inside the prison walls. A twist that involved a face from his past he thought was long dead. Time had become a distorted, agonizing blur for Derek Hanson. The man who sat at the defendant's table in the federal district court was a hollowed-out shell of the titan who used to rule the county. Gone were the Italian silk suits. Gone was the gold Rolex that gleamed under streetlights. Gone even was the weight that made him physically imposing. Hanson was now inmate number whatever, dressed in a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that smelled faintly of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He had lost significant weight. His skin, once flushed with the ruddy complexion of good bourbon and high blood pressure, was now a shallow, pasty gray. His hair had thinned, revealing a scalp that glistened with a cold, nervous sweat. The courtroom was packed, just as it had been on that fateful day in the county court. But the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no humidity, no broken air conditioning. The federal courthouse was a temple of steel, glass, and freezing cold air. It felt sterile. It felt like an operating room where a tumor was about to be excised. Hanson refused to look at the gallery. He knew who was there. He could feel their eyes burning into the back of his neck. Nicole Patterson was there, sitting in the front row, her posture as rigid and perfect as a statue. She wore her dress blues, her medals catching the courtroom lights, a visual reminder of the integrity Hanson had lacked his entire career. Beside her sat Tyler Morgan, the young man whose life Hanson had tried to erase for a statistic. And beside him was a woman Hanson had tried desperately to forget. Emily Warren, the kindergarten teacher whose career he had torpedoed because she wouldn't sleep with him. They were the ghosts of his past, flesh and blood, watching his funeral while he was still breathing. But the worst betrayal wasn't in the gallery. It was on the witness stand. For the past few weeks, Hanson had watched in horror as the Shelby Seven, his squad, his boys, the men he had protected, enriched and drank with, took the stand one by one. They didn't just testify. They eagerly dissected him to save their own skins, to shave years off their own sentences. They painted Hanson as the mastermind, the puppet master, the devil himself. Deputy Owens, the man Hanson had promoted, the man whose mortgage Hanson had helped pay, sat on the stand and wept fake tears. "I was afraid of him," Owens told the jury, avoiding Hanson's death stare. "Derek told us that if we didn't plant the evidence, we'd be the ones in cuffs. He ran the department like a mafia don. We were just soldiers following orders. It was a lie. They had all been greedy. They had all laughed at the thugs they framed. But the jury didn't know that. They only saw a crying cop and a monster in orange." As the jury reached a verdict, the voice of federal judge Harlan Whitaker boomed through the room. Whitaker was not like Judge Baxter. He was a federal appointee, a man with a face like a cliffside and eyes that had seen too much human darkness to be impressed by a dirty cop. He didn't play golf with the mayor. He didn't take envelopes. "We have, Your Honor." The jury foreman stood up. She was a middle-aged woman, a librarian, small and unassuming, exactly the kind of person Hanson used to bully during traffic stops. Now she held his life in her hands. Hanson gripped the edge of the defense table. His knuckles were white. His court-appointed lawyer, a public defender who clearly loathed him, didn't even pat his arm for comfort. "On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act," the foreman read, her voice steady, "we find the defendant guilty." A murmur rippled through the room. Hanson flinched as if he'd been slapped. "On count 2, possession of narcotics with intent to distribute. Guilty. On count 3, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Guilty. On count 4, assault on a federal officer. Guilty." The list went on. 19 counts, 19 guilties. Each one was a nail in the coffin. By the time she finished, Hanson's head was bowing lower and lower until his forehead was almost touching the table. He couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thin, insufficient. Federal Judge Harlan Whitaker adjusted his glasses and looked down at Hanson. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the reporters in the back held their breath. "Derek Hanson," the justice said. "Please stand." Hanson tried. His legs felt like water. His lawyer had to hook a hand under his armpit and hoist him up. He stood swaying, the shackles around his ankles clanking, a sound that signaled his new reality. "In my years on the bench," Whitaker began, his voice low and dangerous, "I have seen murderers, terrorists, and cartel leaders, but I have rarely seen a man who so thoroughly delighted in the destruction of the innocent. You were given a badge, a symbol of public trust. You used it as a license to hunt. You destroyed lives not for safety, but for ego and greed. You are not a police officer, Mr. Hanson. You are a predator." Hanson opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to say something, but his throat was dry as dust. "The federal guidelines for these crimes are severe," Whitaker continued. "But given the sheer volume of your victims and the damage you have done to the public's faith in the law, I am departing upward from the guidelines." The justice leaned forward. "I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will die in custody, Mr. Hanson. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." The gavel came down. Bang! It was the loudest sound Hanson had ever heard. It rang in his ears like a gunshot. Life. He was middle-aged. He could live another long stretch inside a cage. The transition from the courtroom to the transport van was a blur of rough hands and cold steel. The U.S. Marshals didn't treat him with the professional courtesy usually reserved for former law enforcement. To them, he was worse than a criminal. He was a traitor to the badge. They tightened his handcuffs until they bit into the skin. They shoved him into the back of the armored van with a force that sent him stumbling against the metal bench. As the van rumbled out of the courthouse garage, Hanson caught a glimpse of the world through the tiny, reinforced wire mesh window. He saw the sun shining on the pavement. He saw people walking their dogs, drinking coffee, laughing at phones. Normal life. A life that was continuing without him. A life he would never touch again. The drive took hours. They were heading to a high-security federal penitentiary, known as one of the toughest in the system. It was where the system sent the guys who were too dangerous for regular prison, or the guys who were too hated to survive anywhere else. Hanson sat alone in the cage, the vibration of the road rattling his teeth. His mind was racing, trying to formulate a plan. I need to get to the Aryan Brotherhood, he thought, panic spiraling. I need to pay for protection. But I have no money. The feds took it all. Maybe I can trade legal advice. Maybe I can trade secrets about the cartel busts I made. But deep down, he knew. In prison, a cop is the lowest form of life. A dirty cop who made headlines. He was a trophy. Every shank in the yard would be sharpening for him. The arrival at the penitentiary was a sensory assault. The massive steel gates groaned open. The looming guard towers, silhouetted against the twilight sky, looked like monsters. The van pulled into the sally port, and the airlock slammed shut behind them. Get out. Move it. Fresh meat. Hanson was hauled out. The air here smelled different. Damp, stale, and laced with the chemical tang of fear. He was marched into processing. Strip. The command came from a guard who looked barely 25. Hanson hesitated. Look, son, I was a detective for a long time. I know the drill. Can we just... I said strip, inmate. The guard blasted him with pepper spray. Just a burst to the chest enough to choke him. Hanson coughed, eyes watering, and clumsily stripped out of his orange court jumpsuit. He stood naked, shivering on the cold concrete floor while 3 guards inspected him. They checked his mouth, his ears, under his arms. They made him squat and cough. It was the ultimate degradation, the systematic stripping away of Derek Hanson the man, leaving only the biological entity that the Bureau of Prisons now owned. They threw him a bundle of clothes, gray scrub pants, a gray t-shirt, cheap canvas shoes. They didn't fit. Nothing here was made to fit. Name? The intake officer asked, not looking up from his computer. Hanson, Derek, he said. Wrong, the officer said. Your name is inmate number whatever. Memorize it. If you don't answer to it, you don't eat. Hanson was holding his rolled-up mattress, waiting to be taken to his cell, when a senior correctional officer walked into the holding area. He had gold bars on his collar and a clipboard in his hand. Which one of you is Hanson? Me, Hanson said, stepping forward eagerly. That's me. Drop your gear. Warden wants to see you. A spark of hope ignited in Hanson's chest. The warden? Of course. The warden was likely a former Fed or a state cop. There was a universal code, a thin blue line that extended even into hell. The warden would understand. The warden would know that putting Hanson in general population was a death sentence. He was going to offer him administrative segregation, solitary confinement for his own protection. It would be lonely, but he would be safe. Hanson followed the officer through the labyrinth of corridors. They passed cell blocks where inmates screamed and banged on the bars. They passed the chow hall that smelled of boiled cabbage. Finally, they reached the administration wing. It was quiet here, carpeted. The officer knocked on a heavy oak door. "Enter." Hanson was shoved inside. The door clicked shut behind him. The office was spacious, lined with books. Classical music played softly from a speaker. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man in his late 50s. He had iron-gray hair cut with military precision and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was reading a file, Hanson's file. "Warden," Hanson said, his voice trembling with relief. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. You have no idea what it's like out there. They know who I am. If I go to Gen Pop, I'm a dead man." The warden didn't look up immediately. He slowly turned a page of the file. "I know exactly who you are, inmate. I've been following your career for a long time." Hanson smiled nervously. "I was a good cop, Warden. I got results. The media, they twisted things. You know how it is. The liberal press, the politics. I just did what had to be done to clean up the streets." The warden finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue, cold as glacier ice. There was no warmth in them, no camaraderie. "To clean up the streets," the warden repeated softly. He closed the file and stood up, walking around the desk to lean against the front of it. He crossed his arms. "Tell me, Derek, do you remember a bust you made on a mechanic's shop?" Hanson frowned, his mind racing. He had done hundreds of raids. A mechanic's shop, maybe. Was it the Disciples gang? "No," the warden said. "It was a solo mechanic, a kid named Ethan. Ethan Reed." The name hit Hanson like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. He remembered. God, he remembered. It was a botched raid. Hanson had received a bad tip. He kicked down the door, tore the place apart, and found nothing. But Hanson never left empty-handed. It looked bad on the report, so he had pulled a baggie of crack cocaine from his stash, the same stash that had fallen out of his pocket in the courtroom, and tucked it into the young mechanic's toolbox. "Ethan Reed," Hanson whispered. "Ethan was 20-something, the warden said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He was working 2 jobs to pay for his fiancée's engagement ring. He had never touched a drug in his life. You planted ounces on him. You told him that if he didn't confess to being a dealer, you'd arrest his fiancée too." Hanson backed away, hitting the door. "Warden, I didn't know. Ethan didn't survive the county jail." The warden continued, taking a slow step toward Hanson. "He was a gentle soul. The animals in there broke him. He hanged himself with his bedsheet days before his court date. The note he left said he couldn't live with the shame." Hanson was shaking violently now. "Warden Reed, please, that was a mistake. It was the job. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I am Samuel Reed," the warden said. "Ethan was my little brother. I was working at a prison out of state when I got the call. I swore on his grave that I would find the man responsible. But you were powerful, Derek. You were untouchable. So I waited. I worked my way up. I transferred here. And I waited for the day your arrogance would finally catch up with you." The warden smiled. It was a smile that promised pain. "And then a sergeant major named Nicole Patterson did what the entire justice system couldn't do. She knocked you down, and she sent you to me." Hanson fell to his knees. He clasped his hands together. "Please, just put me in the hole. Put me in solitary. Lock the door and throw away the key. I'll never make a sound. Please don't let them kill me." "Kill you?" Samuel Reed laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Derek, if you die, you escape. You don't get to escape." The warden walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Lieutenant, come in." The door opened and the senior officer stepped in. "The prisoner is requesting protective custody," the warden said, staring dead into Hanson's eyes. "He believes his life is in danger." "Yes, sir," the lieutenant said. "Denied," the warden said. "Process him into C-Block general population." Hanson screamed, "No, C-Block is the cartel block. They'll skin me alive." "Lieutenant," the warden added, ignoring Hanson's scream, "send a message to the shot callers on C-Block. Tell them who is coming and tell them that this man is mine. Tell them that if he dies, I will lock down the entire unit for months. No yard, no commissary, no visits. Tell them I want him alive. I want him to live a long, long time." The lieutenant nodded, understanding perfectly. "Understood, Warden. The do not touch order, but accidents happen in the shower. Slips and falls." "Exactly," the warden said. "Just keep his heart beating." 2 guards grabbed Hanson by the arms. He kicked and thrashed, tears streaming down his face, snot running from his nose. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I have rights. You have nothing." Warden Reed roared, his calm facade finally cracking to reveal the long-buried rage beneath. "You are not a cop anymore. You are not a man. You are property of the Bureau of Prisons. Get him out of my sight." They dragged Derek Hanson down the long concrete corridor towards C-Block. As they approached the heavy steel door, the noise from inside grew louder. It was a cacophony of shouting, heavy metal music, and the rhythmic thumping of fists on tables. The guards opened the door and shoved him inside. The noise stopped. Hundreds of heads turned. The air in C-Block was thick with tension. Every pair of eyes locked onto the former detective. They saw the fear. They smelled it. A large man with tattoos covering his face stood up from a table near the entrance. He looked at the guards, then at Hanson. "Warden says he breathes," the guard said to the tattooed man. "Everything else is up to you." The guard stepped back and the heavy steel door slammed shut with a final echoing clang. Hanson stood alone in the center of the wolves. The tattooed man smiled, revealing gold teeth. He didn't move to attack. He just pointed to a bucket and a mop in the corner. "Welcome home, detective," the man said softly. "The toilets are backed up. Start scrubbing." Derek Hanson, the man who had once owned the city, the man who had slapped a soldier and thought he was a god, picked up the mop. As he dipped it into the filthy water, a single tear fell from his cheek. He realized then that the knockout in the courtroom hadn't been the end. It was just the opening bell. The karma hadn't just hit back. It had moved in. And it was gonna be his roommate for the rest of his life. The downfall of Detective Derek Hanson wasn't just a news story. It was a reckoning. The Shelby 7 scandal resulted in the exoneration of scores of wrongfully convicted men and women. The Shelby County Police Department was completely restructured with the Civilian Oversight Committee, now led by none other than Sergeant Major Nicole Patterson, who retired from the Army to clean up her hometown. Tyler Morgan finished his degree and became a paralegal, working alongside Ryan Mitchell to help others who had been targeted by corrupt officers. The slap that echoed through that Shelby County courtroom wasn't just about one corrupt detective getting what he deserved. It was a raw, unforgettable reminder of a deeper truth we all need to carry in our hearts. Power without integrity is the most dangerous illusion a person can cling to. Derek Hanson believed his badge made him untouchable, that he could plant evidence, ruin innocent lives, and slap down anyone who dared challenge him. But in that single moment when Nicole Patterson stood tall and delivered justice with precision and calm, the universe showed us something profound. No matter how high you rise, how much you bully, or how many secrets you bury, real power always bows to character, courage, and truth. When you abuse your position, whether as a cop, a boss, a parent, or even a friend, you're not building strength. you're digging your own grave. The fall may not come today or tomorrow, but karma keeps perfect records. It doesn't scream or rush. It simply waits, patient and unstoppable, until the right person steps forward. Nicole didn't raise her voice or seek revenge. She simply refused to back down, and in doing so, she didn't just free one young soldier. She cracked open an entire web of corruption that had poisoned an entire community. That's the beautiful, heartbreaking lesson. One act of quiet courage can ripple outward and heal what greed and cruelty tried to destroy. So the next time you feel tempted to misuse whatever influence you hold, remember Derek Hanson on that courtroom floor. Expensive suit ruined, jaw wired shut, staring at the evidence of his own sins spilled at his feet. True strength isn't loud or cruel. It's standing firm when it would be easier to look away. It is choosing integrity even when no one is watching. Live with humility. Treat people with respect. Because the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and when it does, it hits harder than any slap. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to stay humble and fight for what's right, drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life when standing up for truth changed everything? And if you believe karma always finds its way, type "respect the badge, never abuse it" in the comments. I want to see how many of us are still watching with open hearts. Hit that like button if you believe justice should always win. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss these powerful real-life lessons. We drop new stories every week that remind us why character still matters. Thanks for being here. Stay kind, stay strong, and remember, the universe is always watching.